Start. Hey, we found a solution to record the meetup using OBS, despite the fact that Google wants me to charge me money to do the same thing. I'm like, yeah, we'll find a way. Well, I think we probably have enough folks to join. And so thank you everyone for coming. And in the next, you may wonder where Riaz is. So Riaz is leaving us. I mean, not like in the longest term sense, but he and his wife are moving to Canada. And so he let us on the core kind of, volunteers know that, there was going to need to be some sort of transition. And I feel, we've had a strong community. He has been a tremendous service and done a wonderful job, leading up the organizing effort. And so I don't think so anyway, I'm very grateful for everything he's done. And, I don't know quite what the future is yet, but, it's not going to be, I can't step up and do what Riaz did. I don't have enough time. I think as a community, we can, have several organizers and keep going, and stay organized. So I have actually, even though I couldn't do that job, there was some money that belonged to the ATO rug, and since we're not meeting publicly, we're not spending as much. So I've taken custody of that as like the treasurer of our group, right? Since I'm not going anywhere, and I'm happy to fill that role. But
distributions.
I'm sorry.
Distributions.
Well, maybe. It's not that much money, Nick. I mean, if we meet in person again and need to order pizza and beer, we could probably do it when that time comes. So anyway, Knox, I believe you work with Riaz, and so when you were interested in the group, you're like, wow, there's a Ruby meetup, that's awesome. And then when we talked about it, you're like, Knox volunteered. Really funny, Josh. I'm sorry.
You can't read the comments, man. It's the first rule of the internet.
I did create a separate savings account for it, so there's no question about where it is. But I'm happy to help out here. So I wish Riaz was here and wish him well. And Knox is going to present to us today. So Knox can introduce kind of yourself, but our first part of this meetup is to have a nice little get to know you chit chat. So that's where I am. Knox is to my right, so I'm going to let him introduce himself, and then we'll go around the room.
Hey guys, so yeah, my name is, can everybody hear me? Well, first off, this is kind of a newish mic. Okay, cool. So yeah, my name is Knox Jarvis. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, from the Sandy Springs area specifically. As Frank mentioned, I do work with Riaz over at LoadUp. It's a logistics company out of Smyrna. And yeah, I've just had an interest in Ruby for a while, and I heard about the meetup, and so I thought if there's any way I could contribute, I thought I might be able to present tonight and talk about Stimulus. So
thanks, Knox. So I guess the next, I don't know if everyone sees the same breakdown, but the next to my right is Dave Kimura.
Yep. Hey everyone, I'm David Kimura, and I've been doing Ruby for about 12 years now, so 12 or 13, I've kind of lost count. So I just do Drift-and Ruby, screencasting, and working the day job. So I've had the same job for the past 11 years now. Yep.
I think Nelson. Thanks, Dave.
Hi, I'm currently a student. I'm working on my final project for school. I'm learning Rails and looking to integrate Stimulus into my project. And Dave, I listened to your show, so I'm a fan. All right.
Thank you, Nelson. Thank you. Mike.
Hi, my name is Mike Scott. I have been around the Ruby community for a couple of years. I'm currently lead a dev team at an advertising agency here in town called 22 Squared, and just a little interested in Express and saw the meetup ad, so I figured I'd drop back into the old rug and hear what's going on with JavaScript.
Awesome. Thanks. Joe.
Hey, I'm Joe, and I've been using Ruby since the end of 2015, and been around ATL Rug for almost that entire time, I've not had a opportunity to use Stimulus, and definitely have an interest in learning it. Unfortunately, I will have to step away very briefly right at 7 o'clock, and hopefully it will be brief, so that I'll actually get to see the presentation. But looking forward to it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Nick, sir, you and your lovely daughter.
I went into the other room because it's feeding time, but Nick Bell, I work at Load Up with Knox and Riaz. His surprise announcement to move to Canada prompted quite the stir in several communities. So I've been around Ruby for 5 or 6 years, and I've been working on a React Native project the last 2 months, wanting to rip my hair out. So I'd love to get back on the Ruby side, but it's always there.
Excellent. Julia.
Hi. I've been a developer since September and started working with Ruby around January, and the past couple weeks have been very lucky to work directly with Frank. Hey, Annie. I'm glad you're here. I met Annie the other day and invited her. So I'm really excited and ready to learn.
Awesome. Well, with an introduction like that, let's skip to Annie. Hey, Annie.
Hi, everyone. I am a new Rubyist.
Woohoo!
And I met Julia last week, I believe. And she told me about this meetup. And I was like, I definitely need to come on here to meet other cool Ruby people and learn about Stimulus and kind of be part of the community. So I'm excited to be here. And I'm from Atlanta.
Well, welcome. I love new people, and we all love Ruby, and so I've been in the community, I don't know, 8 or 9 years now, and it's like the friendliest programming community I've ever been a part of, and so hopefully we won't let you down in that regard with this group here. I guess next I see is Josh Justice.
Hey everyone, I'm glad to be kind of joining in here. I've been doing Ruby since 2015, and I remember that because I came to the Ruby meetup and got a Ruby job from it, and I was very excited about that. So the last couple of years I've been more in the front-end framework world, React, Vue.js, but Rails continues to be, I can't really imagine using anything else for server-rendered apps or for the APIs for my applications. Just love Ruby in general and Rails in particular so much. And recently, I tweeted to Dave the other day, I had a project come up that's a really great fit for server-rendered web pages. Got to try out TurboLinks for the first time, and just really feeling an itching, kind of like Nick said, to kind of get more Ruby. And so, like, that's why the timing of this is great. So I'd love to learn more about Stimulus and just the different, all those different steps along the way that the Rails provides for, like, hey, maybe you don't need any JavaScript, or maybe you only need a tiny bit, or maybe a medium amount, and just that whole spectrum of choosing the different options for your application instead of jumping right to a huge single-page application. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to learning more about Stimulus today. And I grew up in Atlanta pretty much my whole life, so long timer here.
Awesome.
I'm happy
Thank
to see
Josh.
you coming over to the good side, Josh.
I would expect nothing less from you.
I mean, you were a PHP dev at one point, but we all were.
Yeah, I mean, so many crimes in my past.
I've known Josh. Josh and I actually worked together at slightly different times on a program that proved out a concept that got acquired in the nonprofit space by LifeChurch.tv and integrated with the Bible app. So if you go today into the Bible app and you see like the smiley frowny faces as like, how are you feeling? And then like, here, let me recommend some scriptures for you based on that. Josh and I worked on it was built in Rails, but it proved out that concept. That's pretty cool. High five. I got the launch party thing. A very proud moment there.
I should have gone to the launch party.
I know. We went skiing afterwards too. It was great.
I should not have gone skiing.
Well, did I miss anyone? I think that should be everyone. But if you didn't introduce yourself, say something. Ed.
Hello. Can you guys hear me?
Hey, Ed.
What's up, guys? This is my first meetup, virtual or otherwise, since the before times. It's nice to see everyone after so long.
Oh my goodness, I know it. It's great to see you.
I moved to Atlanta about 2.5 years ago from Miami. I'm currently contracting with a company that's still down in Miami, working on about a decade-old Rails app, which is about the length of my experience with Ruby, about a decade. So I'm living in a daily 10-year-old time machine. It's nice to come to the present sometimes and see what's going on while I struggle to pull this app into the present.
Awesome. Thank you. And I just saw Madison Brigham joined. And just to make a quick introduction, Maddie actually is a developer intern with our company, and she's a full-time computer science student at UC Santa Barbara. Maddie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm actually studying computer science at UC Davis right now.
I got the wrong UC, I'm sorry.
There. But yeah, nice to meet you guys.
And Maddie, do you want to share anything? Because you've been like this is your first job where it's like, hey, we do this crazy thing called Ruby. Like, here's some fun books to read. Like, how did you just finish Sandy Metz's book or something?
Yeah, I did just finish the Sandy Metz book on object-oriented design. It's been really helpful kind of playing around with Ruby because in the program I'm in, it's mostly C++ and C, which is obviously a very different side of things. So I've enjoyed actually being able to apply like more high-level concepts I've learned easily in Ruby and be able to link things up that way. So yeah, I've been enjoying myself.
Welcome. Glad you made it.
Thank you.
Okay, so we got Ed, we got Maddie. Any last calls? Did I miss anyone? I think we're golden. So next phase, I mean, of course, unstructured chit-chat is harder in the virtual environment than when we're all sitting around waiting for the pizza or eating the pizza. So, but what I do is I like to do a thing where we say if anyone's looking or anyone's trying to hire, and I don't see a reason why we shouldn't do that here. So, just if you're looking for a job and want to say something, feel free to do so. If anyone's hiring right now, we actually don't have any openings at the exact moment. That could change.
Are you asking for like any company? I know Stitch Fix is hiring right now.
Well, that's good. Okay, Stitch Fix.
Big Nerd Ranch is looking to hire a React developer. So Dave, if you could put that out in your network of React developers, I'd really appreciate it. But seriously though, if any of y'all have an interest, we're not doing a ton of Ruby right now, But if you want to work in different front-end, back-end languages, Golang is a popular back-end language as well these days. But yeah, nothing in Ruby, despite my best efforts right now.
That's amazing. That's a huge change from the past.
Yeah, very much so.
And Brant just joined us. Brant's one of our fearless co-organizers of the Atlanta Ruby Users Group. We've done our introductions, and we were just doing who's looking for jobs and who's offering jobs.
Excellent. Hello.
Well, I think that about covers that. Does anyone have anything you want to, share, like kind of like wins for the week, or something super exciting, or new? Like, I'll share one. It's not completely brand new, but just kind of give an example. I got my first major pull request accepted to Ruby Gems about a month ago or so. And so if you try to publish a gem and it is the same as an existing gem, except that you made a variation of a dash or underscore, it will give you an error now. Which is decidedly better than typo squatting being just wide open for any and gem. So what happened is there was a time when Ruby gems had no typo squatting protections, but it turns out there are bad people that want to take over maintainer accounts and publish malicious gems, or publish a confusingly similar name in hopes that someone, searching for awesome dash gem is confused by the presence of awesome underscore gem, and they're like, oh, this one was published more recently, this must be the one I want, and then they end up using something that is malicious in nature. And so I actually did some work looking at the PostgreSQL database dump from Ruby gems and doing like statistical querying and experimenting with Levenshtein distance, which was the formula that used to be used, and it was problematic for two reasons. One, it's very slow, so you could only do it against protect gems which had a lot of downloads. And two, it was very prone to false positives, because all it does is calculate the number of insertions to transfer one string to another. And so for names that are like 4 and 5 characters long, even a 1 or 2 is too high of a threshold to be able to work accurately as a. So anyway, came up with this method. Is it perfect? No, but it's indexable, so it's fast. So we can protect against all other gem names, not just the super popular ones. And it got approved. And so I'm pretty excited about helping Ruby and Rails security just a little bit extra, at least from that aspect of a supply chain attack. Thanks, Mike. I really am expecting more hate mail at some point. Like, I should be able to publish any gem name well, please, like, who do you think you are to make this rule and get it part of Ruby gems? And it's like, it got accepted. Annie, you mentioned, I hate to call you out, but I guess anytime someone's new, you mentioned being new in here, so that seems exciting. You have a job, you're programming. Like, what do you love about Ruby so far?
Well, I actually just got my first job as a developer at Stitch Fix. Yay! So what I love about Ruby is its simplicity, to be honest with you. I learned JavaScript and Python in bootcamp and kind of self-taught myself Ruby. And just the fact that it's such a simpler language than all the other ones, it was easier for me to code in it. Like, I knew what I wanted to write mentally, I was able to put it down in code form much faster than I did with JavaScript, which was like, oh my gosh, mind-blowing. So I love that. And I'm just excited to get to know the language more and become more proficient in it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem.
Anyone else about to drop like some big announcement? Okay, y'all. I appreciate everyone, and that is wonderful. Knox, I guess we can get started a little early if you would like. Why don't you set us up for what you plan to teach us tonight?
Cool. Yeah. Let me take over here. So. One second. There we go. Cool. So yeah, I'm here to talk about Stimulus, and hopefully you guys can get something out of this tonight. I want to thank Frank and Brant, and if Riaz was here, I thank him too. But this is I'm excited, and I hope you guys can find something useful out of what I have to talk about. So real quick, I already kind of introduced myself, but yeah, I'm from Sandy Springs. I went to Georgia State. I studied economics there, but decided I didn't want to spend my time crunching labor statistics all day long. So I kind of transitioned over into web development. Like Nick and Riaz, I'm over at LoadUp right now, and I'm enjoying it a lot. And in my spare time, when I'm not coding, when there's not a global pandemic going on, I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. This is not me, but normally when I'm doing it, I normally end up looking like the guy on the bottom who's approaching the ground at a high rate of speed. And I joked to somebody earlier that's kind of what I feel like when I'm doing JavaScript as well. So Stimulus has been helpful in that regard. But anyway, so there's a lot of frameworks, obviously, out there. The JavaScript ecosystem has exploded in the last decade or so. There's a lot of frameworks and libraries to choose from, and they're very heavy-weighted, and there's a lot of functionality to them and features. So what exactly can Stimulus offer that these can't? That's kind of what I want to get after tonight. Why is it that when I talk about Stimulus, why is it that it's specifically suited to a Rails developer? Why is it that when I talk about Stimulus, I might say framework in air quotes? Well, there's a few reasons for that. When you think about a lot of JavaScript frameworks, something that generally comes to mind is that it helps you render HTML and build out your markup. You handle states, stateful components, and things like that. You can build out components and subcomponents. You can manage your code and deal with DOM updates and API calls and things of that nature. So Stimulus is different, basically because it deals with a very small set of concerns. It's not concerned with building out your whole HTML and your whole front end. It's very narrowly focused. Its architecture is very different, and it's meant to be a lot more lightweight for that reason. It's primarily concerned with handling events, so things like link clicks, form submits, page loads. It's built with the MVC architecture in mind, which if you've messed around with Rails, you'll be familiar with that. As I've said, it's meant to be more lightweight and to have a lot less going on than other kind of major frameworks and libraries. And it's built using this kind of system of controllers, actions, and targets in order for you to manage the kinds of events on your front end. So what I kind of want to get into is the motivation behind StimulusJS and its creation and its inception. There was kind of a specific problem that came up, or that was needed to be solved, that Stimulus tries to fill or tries to solve on its own. And it all starts with turbolinks. So obviously, turbolinks, I think, came standard as of like Rails 5, I believe. Somebody can correct me on that, but It was used to help manage your link clicks on the front end and make things a lot faster, page reloads. Instead of basically clearing out the whole page and doing an entire GET request, it just uses Ajax to rerun your JavaScript. And it gave you the speed of a single page application and made those new page requests quicker as a result. But it didn't have the kind of functionality or a lot of the features that you'd expect in some front end systems like React, for example. It was just solely concerned with those page reloads. And so because of this, the folks over at, and here's an example, like this is from the what's it called? The TurboLinks GitHub repository. It's just an example of some of the things it allows you to do. But the folks over at Basecamp, DHH and his folks decided that, they're running this kind of pattern called the Majestic Monolith, where Basecamp is running across a variety of platforms, but all their views, models and controllers and their interface essentially is in a single place. And they wanted to kind of mirror that with how they managed a lot of their JavaScript when it came to handling events. And as a result of that, Stimulus came about. So it's not concerned, and this is directly from a quote from DHH when it comes to what kind of motivated him and the rest of the team to create Stimulus. It's not concerned with kind of building out all of your HTML. It just wants to modify what's already there, whether that means toggling an existing CSS class or rearranging different DOM elements or changing around the content. It's just meant to modify what's already there and help you manage that in a kind of more organized way than, say, something like jQuery or even just vanilla JavaScript. It tries to, it's like anti-spaghetti JavaScript, essentially. So let me see here. So I got a small, simple demo that I want to show everyone. There's a much more extensive one that was actually done a few years ago by Dave that's here tonight. He goes for almost 45 minutes. It's way more extensive as to what you can do with this. So if anybody wants to check that out, it's on the ATL Rug YouTube channel. But essentially, what I have is just a very simple Rails app with some just places where you can have events. And what I want to show you is how controllers are set up and how you actually connect the actions to the event calls on your within your app. So what you have to start out with is you essentially have to set up a controller by importing it from Stimulus. You install it in using something like Yarn. You build out a class, and then you have different methods you can define based on what kind of events you want to call. In this case, on page, like there's a native method called connect that on page load it'll just initialize whatever I have within these brackets. So for example, when I load this page, you see it says hello from StimulusJS. I have a greet method that's fairly straightforward. If you look at the HTML, this is where it gets interesting. You have a controller within your div tag that wraps around a data target and a data action data attribute, which is how you define what parts of your application are going to be controlled by the Stimulus system. So once you have this set up, in this case, you essentially have a target that's defined under the controller. You use this spacing to essentially be able to identify it later. And then under the action, you're going to define using this kind of notation what function is going to be called or method's going to be called upon the event being initialized. So in this case, I have a greet event within the controller. If I scroll down, here's the greet event right here. The target, this method is used to find the heading class that was defined under here. And then obviously it's going to change the inner HTML of that heading from whatever it is right now to hello world. So if I go back to my to-do page and I hit greet, it's going to go from this is the home page to hello world. And finally, it's kind of simple. I just have a log method here where anytime that it is called, there's a simple click that is sent to the console. If I just scroll on here, you see I have my controller defined right here. These magic attributes, as they're called, you just place them directly into the HTML. You make sure you define them correctly. In this case, I have the same setup I had here, except this time I'm attaching the name attribute to this one. And then I just call the action and attach the log method to this action. And when it's initialized, it'll simply put out in the console click. So multiple times. So that's fairly straightforward. It's kind of simple. I mean, there's many different ways you can take it. You can use it to organize any set of events that you want and how you want to handle them. But it's really, it's meant to be modular so you can control where it's happening within your HTML, and it's very easy to read. You can see it directly in your markup. It actually kind of reminds me of, if anyone's ever messed around with Tailwind CSS, you can see directly which essentially part of your markup's being affected by what, and it's good for separation of concerns. But if I go back to here, so yeah, that's essentially how that's set up, and yeah, it's fairly easy. There's a lot of different ways to install it and get it initialized depending on what version of Rails you're using, but it's fairly simple. So essentially, if you've used Rails controllers and routes at all, and you're familiar with the architecture of a Rails application, the nomenclature looks very similar, and it's just in the JavaScript ecosystem. As opposed to other frameworks where state is kind of managed within like JSON that's rendered out into HTML, the magical attributes are those little data-attribute notations that were in the HTML, make it a lot more readable and keep it a lot more contained to each individual element. And you could technically, I suppose, try to render HTML using StimulusJS, but it's meant to, and it's designed and the architecture set up to be able to manage events. And so it's just meant to be lightweight and specifically for that purpose. So that's what it's designed for, and I think that it's incredibly helpful to that end, and it's been useful for me, and I hope it is for you as well. So thank you, guys.
Anyone have questions? Or Knox?
Yeah, I thought I would throw this out there. I mean, that's really great information, Knox. I appreciate you sharing that with us. It's always good to see a refresher on it. And StimulusJS isn't just limited to simple DOM manipulations. It is so powerful just because of how simple it is and what you can do with it. You're able to do real-time updates on a progress bar. So if you have a background job running in action and it's going to take it maybe 20 minutes to complete this background job, you can tap into action cable within that background job to send update notifications, which would then get broadcasted out. So your DOM then picks it up. You can use StimulusJS to then start loading up a progress bar. So things are, you can actually get real-time feedback of background jobs running. You can also do some more simple things like client-side validations with StimulusJS. So on form fields, instead of trying to have your constraints at the database level for maybe a presence of a name or uniqueness or whatever. And then also at the model level, you could also have it on the front end and have the StimulusJS do the validations on those form fields as well. Nate Hopkins created Stimulus Reflex, which allows you to write even less JavaScript code and then kind of tap into some more of the Ruby backend or some real-time updates. You can do polling.js. I actually did a Drift of Ruby episode on WebRTC, so actually having a chat room with video and where you can actually have people sharing their video chat, just like a Google Meetup, over StimulusJS as a broker. So even though it is very simple, it is so powerful too, with all the different things that you can do beyond just simple DOM manipulations.
Awesome. Thank you,
Can I ask
Dave.
a question? I'm wondering if Stimulus is supposed to coexist with UJS or replace it. Like, for CRUD operations? Should I still use the unobtrusive JavaScript built into Rails, or should I be using Stimulus?
Knox, you're muted.
I would say that they go hand in hand. In some situations, you would want to use Stimulus, and in other situations, you would want to use UJS. For example, if you have a table, and if you want to delete just one row from that table without causing a full page refresh, you could use UJS for that. That's simple enough. Just add in the remote true on the delete link, and then when you go to refresh, the UJS would then just delete that row element. So in that situation, I think Stimulus would be overkill.
Knox, on your demo, you had a JavaScript file that did like an import thing from a controller.
Frank, I think you're muted. Check your soundboard.
So many mutes. The sad part is that mute doesn't mute what actually apparently gets picked up by the video. Anyway, thank you. Knox, on your demo, there was a file that you showed that was a JavaScript file and it imported from like a controller or something. Can you show that? And is that like coming from the routes? Is it like one-to-one connected with the Rails controller? Or is it a separate controller?
Here, let me share it with you real quick.
Like if I had a like post controller for my blog, would that also be a Stimulus post controller, or is that separate?
Can you repeat what your original question was? Or
yeah, I see import controller from Stimulus, and I guess I'm asking if these controllers in Stimulus have a one-to-one relationship with traditional application controllers that I might see in my routes file, like in my Rails application, or are they separate?
No, I think I know. No, it's the format looks very similar and everything like that, but it's not. They're not the same thing. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was an honest question. I've not used Stimulus.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
no, it's fine. Yeah, no, that's kind of why, I don't know, to me, that's why it seemed like Rails users would be more familiar with it or would have an easier time understanding it, in my mind at least, because they're already familiar with that kind of setup in a way, because they're familiar with routes and controllers and things like that. So
Frank, we actually have probably 25, 30 Stimulus controllers in our code base. They're really like, the way we've started to use them is really like as almost like single purpose, shareable, complex JavaScript modules. So like the one we probably use the most is like a relative timestamp formatter. So, when we have people out in several different time zones looking at an action that happens at a certain time. And we want it to show in their local time. So say somebody in California, we could use, it's really difficult to do that in Rails because, the server rendered pages are all rendered on the server in UTC time. So if somebody looks at a page with an 8 p.m. timestamp, it'll show 8 p.m. whether they're in California or New York City. And what we've used is actually we wrap we essentially wrap a span in this controller and say, hey, here's the UTC timestamp, and then within the stimulus controller, we will just run moment.timezone, which will run on the client and determine the time zone, and then we format it there. So now we wrap any timestamp, pass in the UTC time as the argument, well, I guess the data attribute, and then it essentially will show 8 p.m. in New York City and 11 p.m. in California. And it makes those relative timestamp stuff like that where it's hard to do on a server and you really need to do it in the client in JavaScript. It makes it super easy because now you have all of JavaScript and it's running on the client at the same time. I just wanted to give an example of what we've been using it for and the things that we found that it works the best on. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, I appreciate that. And time zones are a perennial bear to deal with anytime you have to.
I'm a big fan of the classic Zach Holman post of why doesn't everyone just use UTC time?
And now you got to know what they're... yeah. Thank you, Nick.
I have a bit of a JavaScript history question, if anybody has thoughts on this. So thinking about Stimulus, early in Knox's presentation, you talked about those early JavaScript libraries, how very low level they were, and things like that. And Stimulus wanted to add something more robust. I remember there's a framework I didn't get to use, maybe a library that I didn't get to use much, but it felt like it might have been shooting for about the same level of abstraction. So there was Backbone.js at some point, maybe 2012-ish, was sort of like one level beyond jQuery. So it was fairly big in some circles there. And then Marionette.js was sort of like a framework on top of it. And I don't know if it was called an MVC framework, but it was trying to kind of create some of that same kind of reusability. So I'm curious if anybody on the call used Backbone or Marionette, and if you would, how it compares to Stimulus, what we're seeing here. Anyone use that by chance?
Yeah, so I'm working on an application, a legacy app that I inherited that uses Backbone heavily.
Oh, great.
No, it's anything but great. It is a massive application which is just littered with JavaScript all over the place, and it's a pain. I think that if they had just gone with vanilla Rails without all the JavaScript stuff, because they're not doing anything that's really highly interactive on the client side. Nothing that just Rails and UJS at the time couldn't have handled just as well. So I think you're creating a large disconnect between your front end and your back end without any benefit.
Yeah, I've worked on a couple Backbone apps in the past, and then obviously a ton of React. And I think there is a community push away, at least from the communities that I run in, away from like the, API and a single page application front end back towards, hey, you can do 99% of it server rendered with some sprinkles of JavaScript. And I think Stimulus is really helping drive that. Because you can just toss a controller on any page and you know exactly what it's going to do, and then 99% of the rest of it you can do with Rails or Node or whatever you're using.
Well, those are really helpful observations, both of y'all. Dave, it was especially helpful when you mentioned that it's like in this backbone app, at least, maybe you're speaking of others as well, the progress away to putting a bunch of stuff in JavaScript was already kind of started at that early point, which is very different than what we're seeing, certainly in the Rails world in general, and with Stimulus in particular, of like, let the server and let the markup, the template, do its thing, and add JavaScript in a lightweight way on top of that. So it's really interesting. Even that early, there was already this movement towards putting potentially too much happening in the JavaScript itself. Thanks for sharing that.
And Rails is getting even better. It's getting better with every release. With Action Text that was released in Rails 6, it's amazing. If you've ever had to try to configure your own WYSIWYG editor and have it go through a proper security audit, I'm willing to bet that it did not pass because of cross-site scripting. Every single time I've tried to implement properly a WYSIWYG editor, it has always had some kind of cross-site scripting vulnerability that made the whole smash fail the security review and requiring development work. Action Text, none of that. It handles it, it parses it, it does it beautifully.
I'm laughing because I'm conducting a security audit, and one of the findings is the WYSIWYG editor and the server-side sanitization or lack thereof of things that get submitted to it.
I remember when Action Text was released, there was a huge pushback in the community of people, or at least the Rails community of people saying, why we have this long list of problems with Rails, and you guys put your big new release is a WYSIWYG editor. I'm glad some people can appreciate it for what it is, and it solves a lot of problems that a lot of people have had to deal with, but there are a lot of people that were upset about that being the big Rails conf release.
I'm going to be honest, though. I think it really does, and Nick, I do remember that controversy. It's the same thing as Devise. Okay, Devise isn't part of Rails. It's another gem, but it's commonly used. And when you bring in Devise, it uses bcrypt. When you try to use Rails' feature has secure password, it uses bcrypt. You know, the concept of secure defaults, and bcrypt is an appropriate algorithm. If you're really nerdy, you can start arguing whether Argon 2 or scrypt is better for you. But if you're just a dev and you're slapping this together, bcrypt is a great option, and it is currently a secure option for handling password storage. It meets all of the requirements you could want to meet, and it's just something that a dev working on a Rails app just kind of gets for free by default. And that's always been amazing.
And it's also good for storing API tokens. So if your application is going to communicate with a third-party app that is specific to users storing their own API credentials within your application, you don't really want to store it in there by itself. So you can encrypt the password, or not
you can hash it. You still have to have a lookup key.
Does the hashing.
But to the point, though, is not so much that bcrypt is this, because it is a good thing. But to stay back to the point, what I'm saying is to have let's just make the default option the right option 99% of the time when our Rails, someone in a Rails app wants to do this thing, having that default option that's well thought out is a benefit to the platform and the community.
Yeah.
And then we can go work on our other problems that are specific to our own application. It's plural.
I'm curious to know if anyone else has used Stimulus in the group here today. I know, Dave, you've done a ton of it. Obviously, Knox and I do a lot at LoadUp. Crickets.
Yeah, it's still relatively new, I think. I think y'all are definitely on the vanguard. Working on. I know for me personally, a lot of the applications in the portfolio my company manages are older Rails applications. And so we spend, I think Ed mentioned this, living in the past. My main responsibilities live, half a decade to a decade in the past, as far as, even though they've been upgraded, the apps, might be running on Rails 6, but it's really not using Rails 6 features. It was originally a Rails 3 application. So.
Yeah, if you've upgraded your application to start using Webpacker, and if you're on Rails 5 or later, adding in Stimulus, I would say it is very low risk because all the code that you're writing to it is fairly isolated. So if you are wanting to start to transition over to that way of doing things, it's a pretty low risk because you're going to be able to pull out that Stimulus stuff and rewrite it in just vanilla JavaScript if you wanted, if you don't have too many interactions going on. So I would say that it's worth giving it a shot. And I bet once you start doing that, you're going to just keep using it, finding excuses to write more and more of it, because it really is that much easier to work with.
Our typical process is like if we need something that's interactive on a page, before reaching out and doing a React widget, we will say, hey, can this be done in Stimulus instead? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. Obviously, a lot of what we work on is internal, admin facing, where interactivity really is narrowly defined. But, a lot of what we can do, and I encourage everyone in the group to at least go out and try it on the next time you're reaching to build something in React. Try it. If it works, if it is on a Rails page, try it in Stimulus first, because it's just so much simpler, so much more easy to reason about, and it's 100 times faster to load.
So Ed actually in chat, thanks Nick. Ed actually in chat asked a really great question that Knox, I don't know if you saw it, but I think Dave or Nick, either of you probably could answer it. Ed, do you want to ask it?
Yeah, sure. So it's kind of related to the conversation that evolved after I'd asked it. I'm really interested in seeing examples of really large stimulus apps. And part of the reason why I'm asking about it is because when I'm dealing with JavaScript, and I think part of the reason why I like Rails so much is that JavaScript frameworks tend to release a lot of features for better improving the management of your code. So I think about how React went from class-based to functional components and hooks and all that stuff, where you don't necessarily get new features, like you're not getting action text, you're not getting uploading, you're getting a better way to organize your existing app. That's essentially an excuse to refactor the whole thing using the new stuff. I wanted to see some examples of that in Stimulus, about how someone has chosen to, I don't know if architect is the right word, perhaps design a really large app. Like, how did they organize their controllers? What was the file structure? Were controllers a one-to-one mapping roughly to their Rails controllers, or did they represent a different concept, like a module, like the way someone had described earlier about using it as a module to hold a bunch of time parsing functions? I'm curious about how the large stimulus apps evolved.
So I can share my screen if you like. And let's see if I can do this. So let's see. Do you see my debugger?
Yeah, I can see your screen.
Okay. The whole screen?
The dev tools, yeah.
Okay, great. So this is an example of Basecamp's stimulus application. So if you go under the sources and then under Webpack to the dot, application JavaScript and all, the first thing that they have is a application controller, just like you would with your Rails controllers. You have an application controller, and they create this as an entry point or the top level class of their stimulus controllers. And from here, they just define the application controller, and then they just put in some whatever kind of information that they need in there. They have their import controller from Stimulus, just as you would normally expect. If you go under the controllers folder, this is where they actually have all of their code for all of their Stimulus controllers. And a lot of this stuff is just really simple. Let me make this a little bit bigger. So all of these controllers are relatively pretty small, and they just extend from the application controller, which is that JavaScript application controller. So if you have a lot of repeatable code within your stimulus controllers, then extending it from an application controller or something like this is how Basecamp is currently organizing their stimulus controllers. And it's a great place to go to just kind of look at how they are accomplishing certain things within stimulus, because they have quite a few of them.
That's got to be the most organized public JavaScript sources I've ever seen from an inspect element. Thanks, Dave.
Do they have controllers, or do they have the concept of a model or a route or any other types of files?
It's really just the controllers, because with stimulus, you don't have the concept of models really. Everything is just basically what you can interact with on the DOM based on the data attribute or action tags that you put within a controller. And that's pretty much it. But I mean, nothing keeps you or prevents you from having a stimulus controller when you click a button to make an AJAX request back to your Rails application to fetch information, and then insert in a new stimulus controller in the DOM. And then that would immediately get picked up by StimulusJS and initialized as you would expect it to.
I know this is a Ruby meetup group, but there's no reason that you would have to use Stimulus with Rails, correct? I mean, you could use it inside of, again, since this is a Ruby meetup group, you could make a Jekyll app that uses Stimulus.
Yep. Yeah, it is pretty much standalone, just like TurboLinks as well. You don't have to use TurboLinks with Rails. It can exist outside of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of statically generated sites that have a lot more dynamic elements to them than they used to when this started coming on the scene, I think.
Any other questions? Comments?
Yeah, so I think Nick was mentioning earlier how he was trying to decide, for a certain behavior, to decide whether or not stimulus was appropriate for that use case. Can you explain more the criteria that you use to decide whether or not stimulus is the correct choice versus, some other choice?
I thought he was trying to get a hold of Nick there.
Yeah, I mean, but anyone can answer the question, I guess.
Hey, I'm sorry about that. I missed the question. What was that?
You were mentioning earlier how you were for given behavior, you were trying to decide whether or not to use stimulus for that that action, that specific use case. And I was wondering the criteria you use to decide whether or not to use stimulus or to go with some other alternative.
So the way that I think about stimulus is really it's like jQuery plus. jQuery is very good at DOM manipulation, but it's not great at well, it's not great, but you have to do a lot of manual work to find the correct selectors, and then operate it, and then returning or changing the values can be difficult at times. And so like to me, using stimulus is like, all right, how much interactivity do I need on this page? Is it a form with 25 inputs that all have, dependencies on each other where like, hey, I need the submit button to be like, this 30-line logical or piece of logic that determines whether it's enabled or disabled or submitting. If it's huge like that, stimulus is typically not the answer. But if it's something where there's maybe one or two inputs and a couple checkboxes, and you want to display some dynamic data, like you can do it in jQuery, or you could do it in any one of these DOM manipulation JS frameworks. But stimulus is the one that I found where it has the best combination of both the DOM manipulation and the fact that your state is really held in the data attribute.
If that's not a mic drop, I don't know what is.
His audio was cutting in and out like mute, unmute, so I don't know if that was related or not.
No, it sounds like, wow, that's an interesting feature.
Does anyone have a guess where he was going with that?
I'm pretty sure he was going the direction that JavaScript's pretty much evil and you should avoid it unless if it's stimulus. I think that was the takeaway.
I'm not quite sure that is the most succinct summary, but that's funny. Nelson, any ideas there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the last thing he was mentioning was the fact that stimulus holds its state in basically in the data attributes, and so if you, I mean, you have to think about it like how many data attributes can you have in one element, right? You can have 2 or 3, but if you need 40 things to grab onto, then the stimulus controller is not gonna do it for you. You need something else.
Watch, 2021 is going to be the year the C data return.
I mean, C++ 20 is coming out with named parameters, so.
So it's finally time to make the switch. C++.
Maybe so.
All right.
Maybe so.
I think the last point that he mentioned, like one of the confusing parts about JavaScript frameworks, particularly since I was used to come from a teaching background, is that they keep telling us that we need things, and in order to do those things, we need to like become functional programming experts or something. So state management was where he kind of mic dropped. Like, is there anyone who's doing anything more complicated than data attributes for state management inside of Stimulus? Or is that just one of those things that it turns out we don't actually really need?
I'm not using Stimulus at all yet, so I'm not even to that level. I suppose that could be an architectural choice if you're a purist of how separate do you want your data store to be from the DOM. I'm just grabbing at straws. Like there's isn't there in browser like SQLite? What do they call that? There's actual like persistent data storage in the browser that's bigger than a cookie. Would you use that? Or is that not then synced with the server?
I mean, that's not going to sync back to the server by default. You would have to make it sync back.
Yeah.
But I think if you're having to do a whole bunch of DOM manipulation and state management, you can do it in Stimulus, even if you have upwards of 40 attributes. But at that point, I think that, one, maybe your Stimulus controller is getting overcomplicated, that it can be broken out even further. Or, you were starting to, if you were actually reaching problems with that much state management within Stimulus, then maybe you were not using the right tool for the job. So in that situation, moving over to something more proper like React might be a better option, or Vue.js. So I think picking the right tool for the job is going to be important no matter what you're doing. And, sadly, Ruby on Rails is not always the answer, or Stimulus is not always the answer.
Did you just say Ruby on Rails is not the answer always, Dave?
Dude, I walk on a tall horse, but I'm also a realist. I know Ruby's not perfect.
I know it. I just, anyway, great point.
Yeah.
There was a tweet earlier today asking if you could only use a programming language invented prior to 1995, what would it be? And so I immediately looked up Ruby, and it was invented in 1995, so that was not allowed. And then I thought about Perl, which was 86, but then I remembered Perl and thought, no. And so my answer was C++. I would totally just program in C++. Smalltalk, I thought about Smalltalk, but it doesn't really have a lot of modern bindings.
That is a big dig on Perl. I've done barely any C or C++, but I've just heard so much about the dangers of C++. Any of y'all that know it, I'm very impressed.
Perl's pretty good. I made CGI in Perl 5. It definitely had a reputation of having ways to express yourself in ways that later turned into significant spaghetti code. Though CPAN was very remarkable for the time. Like now we have package, .json, we have Ruby gems, but the fact that you could just CPAN include code and have it magically come down to you was amazing in the 90s. And I guess I don't know when CPAN started. I know Perl was like 87. So.
Frank, is it fair to say that CPAN invented remote code execution vulnerabilities?
No, I wouldn't say that. They may have invented the dependency distribution in that way, but honestly, I haven't looked very carefully. I would not be surprised if you could trace it back to Xerox PARC and the ARPANET days if you actually paid attention.
Nice.
I've enjoyed this, y'all. Well, Knox, thank you for leading the charge tonight. It was wonderful. We have a recording, so I'll save it and see about sharing it so everyone can learn from your wisdom and the discussion afterwards. So this was your first presentation, and so one, I want everyone to clap. Like seriously, thank you, Knox. Like, wonderful job. And the thing I want to share with everyone is one of the visions of the Atlanta Ruby Users Group, and this has been the vision for quite some time, is to be a place where new professionals are welcome, and that includes especially for presenting. And so, this was Knox's first presentation in this format, and he did a wonderful job. But we really want to be a place where someone says, I may not know everything. Today was Stimulus. I may not know everything about, what's another Ruby feature? Such and such a feature, but I want to learn it, so I'm going to volunteer to give a talk. And two things happen. One, you learn it better because now you're making a talk. Two, we're a bunch of friends, so we're gonna be appreciative and learn. So it's not a scary place to be. And then three, we record it and put it up on YouTube. And so there have been people over the last 10 years that have gotten jobs, like really good jobs, because you gave a talk at the Atlanta Ruby Users Group. Not just that ATL Rug is that special, but the fact that you're out there, you can watch a video of your presentations, you obviously know something. That can be a really big deal, especially as people, enter their professional careers. So we want to be a safe place and for that, and encourage that continuing. So if you want to give a talk, if you know anyone who should give a talk, this is a great place to do it.
Yeah, and just to follow up from that, I wanted to say thank you to everybody for coming. I really enjoyed presenting. You guys have been incredibly friendly and an incredibly receptive audience, and I'm glad I was able to stimulate, such an interesting conversation about stimulus. I didn't do that on purpose.
It was really funny, though.
Okay.
The only thing I would say about this Google Meet is, I know there's more people in this room than the top 6 squares, but Google, for whatever reason, was not adjusting based on who's talking, so I have to figure that out later. During the presentation, I just maximized the screen. But
and when I was showing the sidebar and like the people tab there, I could my video wasn't showing up, so I could see how I looked because I'm like that. But I could see myself there with the video on when I had the sidebar open. So I think that's at least a way to see some folks. But certain people get featured spots, and we're not sure why.
Right. Well, any parting comments, questions, suggestions, shares? Hopefully we'll see everyone next month. Who wants to present next month? We could ask that. Does anyone want to sign up right now?
I would like to present next month.
Mira? Hey!
Yes. Hi, good to see you, everybody.
Wonderful
well,
to
my
see
English
you.
it isn't the best, but I'm going to try to do it. I'm going to give that a step of faith. That's how we say yes, it is. So I would like to talk. I don't know what, but I want to do it.
Well, are you... I make sure... Did you come in from the Tech 401? It's a pleasure to meet you, and I'm glad you are here. Which Slack community are you on? I don't recognize your name. That's my fault, but this is just meeting you.
Sorry, I just connected to the meetup, but it's where I live. It's 1 hour later, I think. So I couldn't eat that time.
Okay.
But now that I am here, I know I'm going to watch the record that you are going to send us. But I am part of the meetup.
Okay, you're on the meetup. So, wonderful. And so what we'll do is reach out to you there, so be thinking about things, and maybe. So I haven't picked the second Wednesday. The meetup will be So be thinking about topics maybe in the next like week or two, and that way we can put in the talk, like the meetup, like what the talk will be by you, and then you'll have a few weeks to focus on whatever you want to do to build it.
Okay, that's cool. Well, I can contact you from what is that thing where you make the connection? Oh, I am in Ruby on Rails link. I
wonderful.
check on the meetup link, so there you can see me. You can contact me.
Perfect. Thank you. This is so exciting.
Thank you for the invitation.
One nice thing, so the ATO rug is, as far as I know, so, it's the Atlanta Ruby, so Atlanta, Georgia, and as far as I know, it's been one of the longest continuing meeting Ruby users groups in the country. It has been meeting continuously at least since 2008. So I don't know if the one in Seattle or the Bay Area has been going longer. So, but one of the normally we've met in person, but with the pandemic we haven't been able to since the spring. But now with this virtual format, it's easier for you to be here and for new people, which is exciting.
That's the idea. That is something that I can appreciate about this pandemic, that I can see everything that I need. Well, I can learn everything that I need from everywhere in the world.
Absolutely. Thank you, ma'am.
I also appreciate it because I would not have been able to attend. I live in Switzerland, and it is 2 a.m. for me.
Now that's dedication. That is serious. Like, so you're like, I am so into Stimulus that I'm going to stay up and hang out with a bunch of Rubyists like in the middle of the night. That's amazing.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Are you a university student, or you mentioned studying or wrapping up?
Yeah, it's I'm from Los Angeles. This is my second year here, and my wife works for Nestle, so I don't have a work permit here, so I'm going to school, and it's the University of Lausanne here, École Polytechnique, whatever. But yeah, they have basically an extension school, and I'm learning Ruby on Rails through the extension school there.
Oh, that's awesome. That is a very unique kind of life-work situation. That's, I guess, an adventure for your family as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But yeah, I've always dreamed about coding, and finally, at age 40, I feel like I'm learning stuff, and I've got a project that I'm working on, and I'm very excited about. Yeah, so and it's much easier to use Ruby on Rails than what I used in the past, which was the Google Web Toolkit, which was you wrote it in Java, and it compiled to JavaScript, and it worked. I mean, what it produced was really fast, and it worked really well, but it was very hard to write and hard to think about, and Rails is much easier to work with.
That's awesome. So Mayra wants to talk in October. Do you want to take the November spot? You got something cool to share?
It's maybe let's try December, because I'm moving in November, and it's gonna be really hard.
Okay. Well, that's exciting to me, and gives you enough time to come up with something and share. But it sounds like you're. I appreciate the sort of the historical knowledge you're bringing towards Ruby. Like, you're working in Ruby now, and you're able to compare it to a different approach from another technology stack that you have enough familiarity with to be able to kind of discuss the pros and cons coherently, which is really good, because a lot of people, they don't necessarily have that background that you have, And so they're coming in kind of a learning to code situation, and I appreciate that maturity, and I think that would help you be able to really have an interesting talk depending on where you go with that.
Sure. Yeah.
So.
I'll think about it hard.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Well, I hope everyone has a wonderful evening, and thank you all for coming. Knox, again, thank you very much for the presentation. You did an excellent job. And be on the lookout for the next Ruby users group in November, where we're going to be hearing from, I still can't believe, no, October, excuse me, the one in October, where we're going to be hearing from Mayra about something she's going to come up with in the next week or so, and then we'll put it up on there so everyone can know.
Okay.
Did I completely butcher your name? I guess I'm kind of anglicizing it a little bit with.
You have to say Mira. That's why it's usually my name is pronounced in English.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
See you later. Bye.